All right, what's up, you guys? So, quick check-in. How are you feeling today? Give me a number like on a 1 through 5 scale. 5 being I'm feeling awesome, I'm getting pumped. How you doing? General check-in question. Me personally, I'm doing pretty good because I signed up for that movie pass thing where you get like free. I don't know, you get like unlimited movies, and I just got my card, so I'm super stoked. I'm gonna have a nice movie-filled summer. Um, Cool. So it looks like you guys are. No one's a 1 or 2, so that's good. All right. So we're going to be focused on period 5 tonight. And then just to give you some. Is that a. Huh. All right. So a couple things. I'm posting a lot of stuff on Twitter. So if you don't follow me on Twitter, follow me. I'm definitely posting a bunch of stuff in the next couple weeks. And then also, I'm going to email out about this, but I just posted key concept review videos for period 3. So you can check out my YouTube channel to find more resources. So if you want more support for period 3, those videos are up. So I'm working on getting period 1 or 2 done, but you know how it goes. Sweet. That's awesome that you have notifications on. Yeah, so I've got a couple tweets lined up every day for just like tips and stuff and just general questions to kind of practice. All right, so we're about 13 days out. We got 2 weeks. I want to give you just like a quick rundown of what is coming up. I know. The stress is high. So already inside of Fiveable, you can watch the reviews that we already did for periods 1 through 4. Those are all up. There's also the ones that I did for the multiple choice, the SAQ, LEQ, and DBQ. Those are up as well. And then tonight will be period 5. Tomorrow I'm going to post up like a couple different sample LEQ essays, and we're going to kind of break them down so I can show you like what that student did well, what they did right, what this other student didn't do well. So you can see what like a good essay versus a not good essay look like. So that'll be super useful. And then we'll be back next week I'll be live basically every night from Friday until the test. Okay. So this is like, the last weekend before crams week starts. So just to like give you a heads up of what's coming up. So definitely, make sure that you're good to go. Dang, your final is, what is it? Just like a practice test? So they give you a final for just a practice exam? I used to give just like a project for the final. I don't know. But anyways. All right. So AP World final 4th quarter. I know. So my favorite part about AP World is this time of year, because you get to this point where you're like, oh my God, I've done so much. Like you've learned so much stuff this year. And even if you feel stressed out, even if you feel like, how am I ever going to, study the rest of the stuff? How am I going to remember it on exam day? Like you have so much information in your head, and you're going to realize that you're much more prepared than you might think you are. So that's for sure. All right. So let's jump in. So period 5 is the only one that has 4 key concepts. So I would recommend taking notes. These slides are a little bit different just because there's like more text on each slide, but I do have the like important key terms in different colors so that you can see them like pop out. And then because we have 4 key concepts to get through, it's a bunch of stuff. So we got to kind of like chug along. And yes, this review, as soon as it's done, the like Demio, the system I'm using right now, takes a minute to process, and then I'll post it up. I'll upload it probably tomorrow morning. Okay, so if you have any questions about anything I'm talking about, pop it in the chat. As I'm explaining things, I'll stop and loop in an answer to your question, or try to get there so that I answer all your questions. So goal for tonight is for you guys to be feeling comfortable with period 5 content. Okay. So period 5, the thing about these key concepts though, is they're organized really nicely. I think period 5 is organized in a better way than maybe any other period, just because it's very like we're going to cut through industrialization, then imperialism, then the revolutions, and then finally migrations, like as a result of all of those things. So there's lots of points here for like places where there's possible questions, and I'm going to try to point those out as soon as they come up. Like if I see something and I'm like, oh, that could be a good question, I'll let you know. All right, so you ready to go? You guys good? Let's do this. Oh my God, that's small. When I make myself small on here, does my like video actually get smaller? Like, can you see it now right now? Like, am I little up top, or did it not actually change anything on your end? Because on my side, the video never. That's weird. Can you see the slides? Or are they tiny? Can you read them? You can adjust it on your end. Awesome. Okay. All right. Good. Awesome. That's really good to know, because on my end, I can adjust it, but I didn't know if I was adjusting it for you too. All right, cool. So, all right. So again, this is just like a bunch of stuff on the screen at once. And I'm just going to kind of go through it. And so I know that I'm sorry if all the text is overwhelming for you, but we'll talk through it and just slow me down or ask questions when you have them. Okay. So basically, the key concept 5.1 is all about industrialization. And that doesn't just mean the Industrial Revolution. That means all of how goods are, the changes of how goods are produced. This massive shift that happens around the world. It's not unique to Britain. It's not unique to this like one, industrial revolution that we think about. It's a movement. It's a much larger development. But it starts in Great Britain, and there are several reasons as to why. So it's right around 1750 that it starts. That's kind of why they have this date at 1750. It's one of the reasons why. But some of the reasons why it happens in Britain and not like China, for example, is because Britain's geography was kind of perfect for it. They had rivers to provide for energy. They had coal deposits. They also had a perfect number of the population. It was growing, but it was small enough that labor was still expensive. So it's not like in China or in India where there's so many people and there's a peasant population that you can hire for cheap. In Britain, that like peasant population doesn't exist. So instead, the labor is a little bit more expensive. So there's more motive to become industrialized, so that you can produce more faster, if you're going to pay your workers more. Did they stop the 3-field system and change to rotation at this time? So they really, I'm not sure. I'm not sure in terms of agricultural changes. There's really just like a massive shift from agriculture to the factories. And so far less people are using agriculture in general. That's a good question though. I'll try to loop back to that. All right, so some of the major technological advances that happened in this time period are really important for driving this industrial change. One in which is the steam engine. There's obviously several. Do you have to know all of them? No. The steam engine is one that is specifically listed in the key concepts, so I would recommend knowing that one. And because that one is such a big, like when we change our energy sources, that's how we're able to produce more, one of the biggest reasons. And then the printing press actually is before. So like a version of the printing press comes about in period 3. China is the first one to do that. And then it spreads to like the Islamic caliphates in India. And then the like more like not industrial, the printing press that like Gutenberg developed, that's in 1500s. That's a little bit before. So the steam engine, here we're talking more about things like the cotton gin, things that like a little bit after this, after 1750, but like tractors, exactly, spinning jenny, things that produce a lot more materials faster. And so industrialization spreads from, starts in Great Britain, and then it spreads into Europe, into the US, into Russia, and then Russia and Japan are kind of a little bit later, right? So at first they don't want anything to do with like the way that it's done in the West. They want to do it the way that they do it. They're more traditional in those senses. And I think it comes up a little bit after. We'll talk more about the spread of industrialization and how it's different. The industrialization that happens in the 1800s, especially in the US, is considered the second industrial revolution, but it's really all just part of the same process. But in the US, there are some new, the US is, so basically when you think about it, where it spreads to, those countries are similar, right? So like the US has, just like Great Britain, has a lot of natural resources for energy, has a lot of skilled labor, and doesn't have like that peasant population, right? So is the second IR only in the US? No, no. I mean, it's just like the US would be the biggest example in that time. It's just considered the ones that happen like in the 19th century rather than the early adopters. Let's see. So with mercantilism, capitalism is gonna really replace mercantilism, because that is more about trade and capitalism is more about production, which trade is part of that, but it's a little bit different in terms of the policies you would want. So mercantilism is just kind of the tail end of period 4, and helping to like the like joint stock companies, the Columbian Exchange, all of those like international trade routes that happen are in there. So like Thomas Edison with the light bulb, that's part of the like second IR, right? Okay, so that's a little bit about the like basics of industrialization, and then some of the ways that this changed things. So when you think about like continuities and changes here, or effects of industrialization. So one of the major effects is this like new demand for raw materials and for new like markets. So, because of industrialization in these like westernized countries, they need to get more access to the raw materials like cotton, like rubber, like sugar. And so those are going to drive imperialism, which we'll talk about in the second key concept. And what you're going to see is a shift in the types of production in different countries. So, for example, someplace like India had a massive, what's it called? A massive industry in like hand woven textiles, but with industrialization, it mechanizes that whole process, right? So instead of, it takes a long time and it's expensive to have someone hand weave something, but when you can use a machine, it's much faster. So in India, the entire hand woven textile industry is largely replaced by the mechanized process. So there's a lot of changes like that happening around the world, where the industrialized versions is replacing the traditional industries that exist. And so even another example would be decreased shipbuilding in India and Egypt, because those would have used some of the older methods, and then you're going to increase the production of shipbuilding in the US and Europe because those are going to use some of the newer methods. So there's really like that replacement, and that basically leads to what you have in terms of developed countries and developing countries, right? Industrialization is going to create that like massive divide between the rich and the poor countries. And then second is just like an expansion of the global economy. So for example, the cotton that's grown in the Caribbean is exported to Great Britain and Europe, where they produce different textiles, which are then exported out even further. And so just like really ramping up industrial, like international trade. So those would be some of the effects. So think of this as like the first bullet point was causes of the Industrial Revolution. The second bullet point is now effects. And then the third one is about like, okay, how do they pay for it? Because there's a ton of, this is not cheap. It's not, to industrialize is not free. You have to put a lot of money into it. So part of it, in terms of how to pay for it, and like the first thing that's in there is some of the like theories behind it. So these two people are really important to know: Adam Smith for capitalism and John Stuart Mill for like classical liberalism, because both of those theories, both of those foundations lay the path toward capitalist industrial societies. So Adam Smith, he's the one who wrote The Wealth of Nations, and that whole thing is about like the invisible hand of like the market economy. And so the government should, not touch the economy, leave it alone, and the market forces will go up and down on their own. They'll fix themselves when they fall. And so that's his theory. And so that capitalist theory is what really replaces mercantilism. And then classical liberalism in terms of John Stuart Mill, this is sort of like the government shouldn't necessarily have a role in the economy, but that it should have a role in society, in like, for example, like social programs, sort of the beginning of that the like government can be involved in your life, but not dictate the economy. Question was, how important is it to know Marx and socialism? Those are both things that you should recognize and connect. And then the difference between classical liberalism and liberalism. Liberalism is just like the newer version of it, and so it's just a little bit more like modern potentially. And so when we're talking about John Stuart Mill, this is an idea that he thought up in the 18th century. And so any idea in the 18th century, even if it still makes sense today, isn't going to totally apply today. So his is just like the classic one. And yeah. Is it likely that we could get a cause and effect prompt on industrialization? So I have no idea the like chances of, whether or not you get a prompt, but this is a great topic, right? There's tons of stuff to talk about globally. So I would say this is a good example of a prompt that definitely could be on the test. Who created socialism? Actually, it's kind of funny. I had this conversation earlier today. You don't need to know, like, socialism, the idea comes out of like the person you can connect socialism to the most would be Karl Marx. Anyone else that comes up with the idea, like, it's sort of something that even like all the way back into like Greco-Roman times, there are like foundations of socialism. So it's not really clear who came up with it and when, but Marx is the one that really kind of pulls together all of those ideas and sets forth like a plan. And I think he comes up a little bit later in this slide. Okay, so some of the other ways that they paid for these things is through the stock markets, through the gold standards, through different like job or corporation things. And transnational businesses are also important, where like the United Fruit Company would be one, and the HSBC is Hong, is it Hong Kong? I forget what it stands for. Something Shanghai Banking Company. And so basically you get companies that are international, right? These like global corporations, and those are two examples, transnational, across boundaries. The one thing that gets me with socialism is that there's always some leader in government higher class. Right. So the thing about socialism is that we haven't really seen a society that's like a pure socialist society. Like the idea of like utopias, what has been thought about, but you don't really have it in practice because you have a leader. And so exactly right that you don't, how can you have a purely socialist society if you have some sort of dictator, some kind of leader, or even if they're whatever kind of leader, it doesn't totally fit. So we've never really seen a pure socialist society. Frederick Engels is connected to Karl Marx. Karl Marx gets most of the credit for it. It's not possible. Right. So, I mean, the thing about socialism too is that you can't really have socialism and capitalism, because capitalism leads to classes. And so, that is kind of the case with that. The United Fruit Company is a transnational business. So this was exactly owned, South American fruit company. Would we get a prompt about the United Fruit Company? So the United Fruit Company you could get a prompt about transnational businesses. The whole thing wouldn't be about the United Fruit Company. But the idea of transnational businesses could be a prompt, could be like a DBQ even. That would be an interesting topic that I haven't seen quite yet. All right, so I'm going to move to this next slide. So a couple more things. Some of the responses to industrialization. So, when you have, okay, so here's where Marx comes up. So because of industrialization, some more effects to it would be labor unions. So industrialization essentially is like, leads to an exploitation of the lower classes, because the goal of the person that owns the factory is to make money and to do it as fast as possible, right? The more you can produce, the cheaper your labor costs are, the more money you make. So with that, they the work conditions are pretty brutal, where you have women and children, and men as well, but like this is where we're going to see more women and children be a part of this, totally being exploited. It's not like these children want to be working. They do not want to be working, and then they have to be working. And so they have to work 12 plus hours a day in horrible working conditions, and they're not paid much for it. And so labor unions was the thing to solve that, where you have all these people together, and if you collectively bargain for your rights, you have more power. So if you want to see an example of labor unions in practice, we're seeing this play out even right now with teachers, right? So you have in several different states recently teachers walking out. And if it were just one teacher or just a small group of teachers, it doesn't have a big impact, right? The district doesn't have to listen. The state doesn't have to listen to just a small group. But when everyone does it, when they collectively work together to do it, they have a much more power to bargain for their rights. So this is true with everything. Could you argue that industrialization increased job specialization even further? Absolutely, because not everybody, you can continue to like specialize in what you want to work on. Okay, so the second thing here is just the movements within the political parties and that alternate vision. So Marxism and anarchism. Anarchism is not actually used anywhere, but it's an alternate vision that people have. So when you're living in a post-industrial society, like if you were living in the 19th century and you're dealing with overcrowded cities and poor working conditions, people are starting to think like, it could be better. How could we make this better? And so one idea is, let's get rid of government. That'll make it better. Another idea is we need to get rid of classes. It's the class system that is ruining everyone's lives. So if we don't have classes, then we might be better, right? So these are just like theories, they're ideas. Can I go more into detail about what Marxism claims? So the basics about Marxism is that the class society, right? A class society where there is like a lower, middle, and upper class, is essentially leading to the lower class will always overthrow the upper class. And so Marxism would argue that we should have a more egalitarian society so that doesn't happen. That you have an equal playing field, essentially. That would be kind of the basics of that. Did the Renaissance amount of art end? I know there were painters. You do not. Yeah. So the Renaissance is over at this point. The Renaissance would have happened before. This is where the Enlightenment happens, and we're talking about the Enlightenment in 5.3 with revolutions. Opium wars will come up in Imperialism, so in a few slides. And then the egalitarian society is essentially like where everyone is equal, right? So you don't have any sort of power structure, no hierarchy, no one's better than anyone else. All right, and then the other key piece here is that not all states industrialize in the same way. So where you have the US and Britain, Germany, France, they're industrializing through private wealth. So you have rich people investing in building factories, in, promoting the new technologies, and they're the ones driving industrialization. In Japan, Russia, and Egypt, and the Ottoman Empire, those are state-sponsored. So in Japan, for example, the state is going to invest in building factories, invest in building railroads. Japan builds like thousands of miles of railroads in like a decade. And that is coming from the state paying for it. So that is not how industrialization happens in the like earlier ones. So, and honestly, those are sort of out of a need to militarize. And so Japan and Russia and Egypt are kind of like, there's examples of where they need to industrialize in order to keep up with the militaries. They know that they're going to fall behind. So industrialization as a state-sponsored program is largely because of the need to militarize. Okay, so would you say that Marxism was more focused on the people's issues? Yes and no. I mean, he's definitely more concerned about the people than the rich people, but at the same time, it's not necessarily about like social welfare programs. It's a little bit different. Can I please compare and contrast capitalism, communism, and socialism? So I don't have time to go through all of those right now, but capitalism would basically just be more about um, class societies, private wealth, things are about profits. Socialism would be more about the collective community and producing things together. And communism is sort of like socialism, only there's a really strong dictator involved. Yes, Marx was against capitalism. And he also was against like religion, even. Like religion would be like, for him, he called it like the opiate of the masses. It's like it blinds people into what's really going on. All right, so moving forward. So other effects, you've got the middle class rises, family dynamics will change. So because children are in factories, that changes the family dynamics. And even because families are off like agricultural fields, they are less, you don't have to have as many children. The changing gender roles, and then the cities. There's a lot of new cities that come about, and they're like magnets for people looking for opportunity. So a lot of people will migrate, and we'll get into that in the last one. Urbanization is the rise of cities. So building lots of cities and then all the challenges that come with that. So when you have a lot of people, you have, sanitation issues, disease, overcrowding. Like, so you do not want to live in a 19th century city. Like London, New York in the 19th century were disgusting. So that's a problem, right? People had to deal with that. All right, so here's just like an example. So this is a image from a photographer. No, they didn't throw poop out their windows. They do have forms of sanitation. However, it is not necessarily the best. You just have a lot of people living in close quarters, a lot of homeless, right? So this photographer, Jacob Riis, was a American photographer, and he documented a lot of this. So this was like a normal site where you just had a lot of orphans, you had a lot of people living on the streets, a lot of just totally overcrowded places to live. So this is just an example for you. All right, so I'm going to move into imperialism because there's just so much to talk about. Okay, so remember that because of industrialization, you have a need for imperialism, and you have like a motive for it, right? So imperialism really comes out of the need for raw materials and the need for new markets. So you can kind of think of it as like the M&M thing, right? Like the motives for imperialism are those two M's. And basically the industrialized powers are the ones that become the colonizers, right? So like Great Britain is like one of the biggest examples. The Dutch, the Germans, they come up a little bit later. The Americans as well. And so you have some colonies had already existed before this time, but they're going to strengthen their control over those colonies. So for example, in India. So India didn't necessarily, like it was a colony of Britain before this time period, but they didn't have as strong of a control on them. So they're going to increase their control. In Indonesia, the Dutch, same thing. Would manifest destiny count as industrial? It would count as imperialism. Yeah, absolutely. And so the states expanding, that would be manifest destiny, right? So you have places like Great Britain gaining more territory. You have the US gaining more territory, and same thing in Japan, just like increasing their territories. And so the US in particular, in this time period, expands across the entire continent, right? So at the beginning of the time period, they're just the East Coast, and then by the end, they have all of it. No, you're absolutely allowed to write about the U.S. The U.S. is part of the world. What allows these places to gain so much power? Guns is part of it. The motives that they have to keep them under their control, exploitation, just like totally drawing people. But actually, one of the biggest reasons of how they're able to gain power is by using the locals to manage. So for example, in Dutch Indonesia, there were only like 300 or something Dutch leaders in Indonesia, and they were there to rule an entire country. So you can't do that unless you have the cooperation of the people living there. Same thing in India. So like in India, it's not actually that many British people who are in India to control India. For them, it's much more of a indirect rule. But what you have is a lot of Indians will profit off of the colonization of their own country. They will, take money from the British to build out the railroads, for example, and they'll hire people and they won't pay them very much. And that's a lot of how, like, a lot of people in India will get a lot of money. Britain gained control of India. Actually, I'm not exactly sure when that happened. But in this time period, they're going to just like clamp down their control on them. So there's just like other just types of imperialism and methods in which the colonizer gains control of the people. Some examples would be like diplomacy. So this would be not through force, through agreements or treaties. So in the US, for example, the Native American treaties that are exploiting the Native Americans, taking their land, that's diplomatic. Another example would be the Berlin Conference. So you have, a bunch of European guys sitting around a table with a map of Africa, dividing it up. That would be diplomatic, although they don't have any African people coming to that meeting. So it's diplomatic, but it's one-sided. So just because it's diplomatic doesn't mean that it's fair, okay? So yes, exactly, scramble for Africa. In terms of warfare, there's plenty of examples of the colonizers going in and gaining control through violence. One example would be the Belgians gaining control of the Congo. By the way, the Belgian rule in the Congo, the person to know for that is King Leopold, and he is kind of the Hitler of Central Africa, okay? So he literally, he essentially did a genocide in the Congo based on his treatment of the people there and his enslavement of them to produce specifically rubber. And that was a totally crazy thing that happened that we don't talk about. And we certainly don't talk about in the same conversation as someone like Hitler. And so that's kind of an example of just like how, even though you're taking AP World, it's still like almost like Eurocentric. It's King Leopold II. All right, so did the Berlin Conference make anything official, or was it like, I promise not to invade here? No, it pretty much made those like boundaries official. Okay, so the second example would be economic imperialism. This is where you gain control of a place and you do it through economic means. So like opium, for example, you get the people, essentially hooked on opium, and then you become their only supplier. You've got control over them. But you didn't sign any treaties and you didn't go in and shoot anyone. You just have their markets. And yes, this would be the Opium Wars. The Monroe Doctrine is a similar thing where the U.S. gains control of Latin America because of economic ties specifically. Then neocolonialism is very similar. That's really like U.S. investments in Latin America. That's like the United Fruit Company, for example. And then finally is settler colonies. This is where you have a colony and there are a lot of migrations to that place. So South Africa is a settler colony. America is a settler colony, and Australia as well. So these are three examples of colonies that basically like where white people live in the world that aren't Europe. Those were settler colonies. That's a pretty easy way to remember it. Canada would be one. And a lot of them were former British colonies specifically. Okay, so what you're going to see in terms of imperialism is some states will expand and others will contract, right? And so the ones that are expanding are like the US and Europeans, because they're like pushing their influence over other people. So for example, in Japan, there's a need to open up the ports in Japan because they want to gain control of the Japanese markets before someone else does. And so Matthew Perry goes over and, his goal is to open up the ports, and this would be the end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the beginning of the Meiji Restoration. So when we talked about like Japan industrializing, this is when that really starts. So all the modernizing that happens in Japan and why Japan becomes such an international power in the 20th century is because of the Meiji Restoration. And yep, Matthew Perry. He basically was like, open it up or you can deal with our power. So in all cases, we see resistance to imperialism. So, I don't want you to think that all these, Europeans and Americans went into the world and took things, and Black and brown and Asian people around the world were like, that's okay, you can have my land, you can have my money. Like, absolutely not, right? So in all cases, people resisted. Sometimes you have resistance that is violent, and you have people fighting back, right? Like the Zulu in the southern portion of Africa. In the Balkans, you have that. In like the Sepoy Mutiny in India, you have that. And in some cases, another way to resist is through culture, is through keeping your traditions. Things like syncretic religions is a way to resist imperialism, because you are keeping your tradition alive. You're not just becoming, assimilating. And so you see that everywhere as well. Keeping languages, keeping histories, keeping religions, keeping, all sorts of traditions. Those are ways of resistance. And were there any countries where people did not resist? No, every single country there is an example of resistance. Not all countries are successful, right? And some countries have larger examples than others. But when you think about like the Native Americans, so like every Native American tribe is resisting in some way, whether they are literally fighting back, whether they're trying to form alliances, trying to get out, trying to keep their culture. You see it across the board. Okay. And then what? So imperialism doesn't happen because of racism. Racism is going to increase because of the need to imperialize, right? So imperialism is really, it starts as like this economic motive, and then these other things like social Darwinism and the white man's burden will justify those reasons to go out and conquer the world, right? They sort of start out as right. So it's used to justify, right? So scientific racism, not quite nationalism yet, the civilizing mission, all of these things are used to justify racism. So it's kind of similar to like Atlantic slave trade. The slave trade doesn't start because of racism. The slave trade starts for, a need for labor, essentially, like to break that down, and then will continue because of racism. Exactly. Religion being used to justify kings. Exactly. So people always need justification to do bad things. Exactly, right? So you come up with like, well, the white man has all this stuff and they have to go out and civilize the world. It's their duty to share the resources. And that's kind of like the way that you would justify being out there in the world, having colonies, having Americans saying, yeah, we should totally have the Philippines, even though we just liberated them from Spain. Now they should become an American colony, right? When you think about the people deciding this, they're thinking about all the money they're going to make off of the Philippines and how easy it would have been to control them. But it's a lot easier to sell to the public. We're helping them. Their lives are horrible without us. And look how much we have. It's so much easier, for us to help them. That is a PR tactic, right? It's a lot easier to sell that message. Right. So you've got Darwin that has, you have the theory of evolution, and then it's just applied to humans. And people will buy into that. And like really believe that there is a hierarchy, that white people are superior to all other people. And that doctrine obviously has so many consequences well into today. But this is sort of where you are going to get an increase in that. So this is a popular cartoon that is around. This guy is Cecil Rhodes from South Africa. And so if you just sort of look like this, look at this, he's British, and you can kind of see, where he's, so you've probably analyzed this, and you've seen this before. And this is one that I really like, because the way he's standing, he's sort of got that like those puppet strings, and his feet, look at where his feet are. He's British, and his feet, one is in Egypt, one is in South Africa, right? And he in particular, actually, like, just like they are, but they're sort of like, they're connecting, but they're like, it kind of seems like he's sort of puppeteering, and it is kind of like manifest destiny for Africa. It's like British should control all that region. But something interesting to know about Cecil Rhodes is right around the same time that in the U.S. we've been, discussing, just like right now, like this past summer even, we've been discussing our Confederate monuments. In South Africa, there's a monument of Cecil Rhodes at a university. And the students at that university have been protesting his monument because he's a perpetrator of imperialism. And so, just like we might be upset about Confederate statues, they're upset about like a statue of Cecil Rhodes. So as just like an interesting like modern day point of synthesis there. And this example here, this is the Manifest Destiny. This is something you might see more in US history, but it's so fascinating because you see like on the right side, it's lighter, you look at like how bright it is. And she's sort of like bringing, like enlightening the country as she goes, right? She's bringing with her all these people, all this opportunity, and all of them are essentially chasing away the buffalo, the Native Americans that you can see all in the, and that entire side of this painting is just darker, right? It's like bringing the light into the West, when you think about Manifest Destiny and like the white man's burden and the civilizing mission, like these all fit into the same story. It's actively saying that the whites scare the Indians, but didn't the Indians for a while terrify the whites? Yeah. They both don't understand each other, right? They're both just like, what the heck? And there is for sure fear there. But for this, she is very much just showing, like this right here is promoting American progress, right? You can see the railroads coming behind her, and just what gets me the most is just the lighting, is how it's like light and dark. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the moral of this key concept is exactly that, Alexis. White people aren't very nice. And that is obviously something that is before too. Yeah, oh yeah, she is holding telephone wires. I wouldn't be surprised if she's holding a Bible of some sort. Trying to see, and even just like too, you can see how like the environment is changing as they're coming through, right? Like the grass, the color of the grass is changing, and this is this isn't necessarily the start of Westernization. This is just kind of promoting it. All right, so let's jump into the revolutions, okay? So again, I know there's like a bunch of stuff on here. So the first point is sort of like causes of the revolution. So to sort of like bring you through this, the Enlightenment is really your like your not continuity. It's the commonality between all of the revolutions in this time period, because at the beginning of in this time period, because of industrialization, because of imperialism, you have people really questioning, what is the right way to govern? What is the right way to how do we understand human life, human society? How should we treat each other? How should the government treat us? All of these different ideas are coming about. And even just like questioning the role of religion, is it true? Is it not true? Because you have so many ideas of science coming about, and it's really hard to connect, to believe, to like fully believe in both, especially at this time when you have ideas of like the supernatural, and then you have ideas of science, and to sort of connect them, to choose one, people are really questioning a lot of things. So I've just put in orange some of the major people to know from the Enlightenment. Voltaire is a really important one. His biggest thing was religious tolerance. So that's that like rel toll. Rousseau, his thing is the social contract. And the social contract is basically like you enter into a contract with your government, and in that contract, you're basically giving up some of your personal freedoms, but in return, you're getting protection and like supports, right? So as a member of society, as a citizen of America, right? Like you can't just do whatever you want. Like you do have a limit on some of your freedoms. However, it's sort of like it's in exchange for the government protecting you. And that's what the social contract is. John Locke is one of the most influential of the American Revolution. So he's the natural rights, life, liberty, and for him, it was property that gets changed in the Declaration of Independence to be pursuit of happiness. And then Montesquieu is another one. He is the three branches of government guy. And so all of these different ideas are leading people to question things like women's suffrage, voting rights, who should vote, who gets the vote, abolition of slavery. It's really hard to buy into natural rights and not into abolition, right? So more people are going to start to question slavery. And within the 19th century, slavery is abolished everywhere. At the beginning of the century, it is the main economy of many places. And then by the end, I think Brazil is the last major country to abolish slavery, and they do so in 1888. And then just the end of serfdom. So just changes in our society because of all these ideas. There's 3 documents that you should know in this time, and they all are the basis of the different revolutions. The Declaration of Independence is the United States document. The Declaration of Rights of Man is the French document, and then the Jamaica Letter is South America. And all 3 are very similar. They're really announcing to the world a call for independence from that country, a call for change, and a statement about what the future of that country should look like. But none of those documents have legal standing, right? Like the Declaration of Independence doesn't have our laws in it, but it just sort of outlines, it's like our mission statement, right? It just kind of says this is what America should be. Just like the Declaration of Rights of Man says this is what France should be. Serfdom is, thanks Dylan. So it's just your bottom form of peasantry. Okay, so here is where you are also going to see this rise of nationalism, and all these isms. You could create a Quizlet deck just on isms, and you have, basically the idea is that if there are commonalities between language, culture, then there could be a state, right? So this is where you get nation states. And nation states don't exist before this. And a nation state would be a state and by state, I mean country. So Germany, Italy, the Philippines, where you have a group of people who share a language, who share a culture, and share that same territory. So Germany is going to unify the smaller German states into one German state that is linked by their language, linked by their culture. The United States, by the way, is not a nation state. They would be a different form of a state. Although, of course, we have nationalism, where, people think we're the best. All right. So frustrations with imperial rule. So, this is where you get the revolution. So basically you're coming out of a time where there is monarchies and of course the imperial rule, right? Colonies exist in the 4th period as well. And so all of these different things all these revolutions are challenges to the norm, challenges to the way things are. And so in some cases you have challenges to just centralized government. This example would be in the Mughal Empire, where they are sort of challenging their centralized government, the powers of their centralized government. Another example would be colonial rebellions. This would be the United States, right? The U.S. is our colonies. They rebel against Britain and they gain their independence through that. Haiti is another example of that, where they were French and then they rebel. And the same thing with South America. You're going to see slave resistance in different places. So obviously Haiti is the big example of a slave revolt. It's the only time in history that a slave revolt led to an independent state. And but there's also slave revolts that are happening in the U.S. as well. An example would be Nat Turner. And then you also have other anti-colonial movements that don't necessarily lead to independence. So the Sepoy Mutiny in India, the Boxer Rebellion in China. And then there are other rebellions that are just influenced by religion. So the Ghost Dance in the U.S. is a Native American resistance, and it pretty much leads to an entire massacre of a whole tribe, because the Americans get nervous about what they're doing, and they're sort of appealing to their powers. The Xhosa cattle killing is a really weird example, where it's in South Africa, and it's just like one tribe, this one like girl got a vision that they should kill all of the cattle, and if they did so, then they would rid their country of their like imperial rulers, and it basically just leads to famine. So people everywhere are just like killing their cows, but that ends up leading to famine. Um, yeah, that was definitely a weird time to like come in. Yeah, it's really weird. I tried reading about it just to understand it more because I was like, wait, what? But it is so the whole time you're reading about it, you're just like it's really unclear of like why that would happen. They believed that this girl had this vision and people like just believed her and she became this like thing. Um, yeah, I don't know too much about the ghost dance. The ghost dance I think was more of like appealing to the like spiritual gods. And it like people started shooting at them basically because they didn't know what they were doing. Um, okay, so all the isms that come about, the the different like political isms, liberalism, socialism, communism, these are all linking people together. They're transnational, right? So it's not one country, it's not one group of people. There are examples of liberalism everywhere. There's examples of socialism, or people who are fighting for those things everywhere. And or feminism is another example of a transnational movement that is linking people together. So in this time, like Mary Wollstonecraft would be the one of the Enlightenment thinkers that is female. You also have Olympia de Gouges, and she is someone mentioned this before. She was such a badass. They wrote the Declaration of Rights of Man, and she published a document in response that was the Declaration of Rights of Women, and it basically says like, couldn't you at least let us be part of this? Like how are you gonna say that men deserve all these rights, but that half of the population, the women, don't deserve that? And so she publishes this document and it doesn't go well for her. She is like one of the only women that, yeah, she's a queen, but then she's beheaded and with a guillotine. So she doesn't make it out of the reign of terror. That's not awesome. Yeah. But she's like, the fact that she did that was like, she knows that she's going to be targeted for that, but she was just like, you know what, this is forget it, I'm writing this. So I just think that's cool. And then Seneca Falls is something that happens in the US. It's like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And then you also have like Frederick Douglass that goes to that too. And it's sort of a meeting of the minds, of the feminist minds, of the abolition minds, of like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to win suffrage for women? How are we going to win freedom for, African Americans? And so that's sort of one example of like feminist movements. This, by the way, is the first wave of feminism. So the goal of the first wave of feminism was like suffrage. That was the main goal, is to just earn voting power. The second wave of feminism that happens later is more about equal rights, equal pay, equal rights in jobs, right? So it's like you have the vote, now we want more things. And now we're sort of in the third wave of feminism that is looking even beyond that as more of a way to be even more inclusive, more, more equal rights. Do you need to know the causes and effects of each of the four revolutions? So those are definitely good to know. And honestly, a lot of them are very similar. One thing that you should know is that the French Revolution was largely removed from the key concepts. Like, as you can see, it's almost barely mentioned. So do not spend your time learning about all the details of any of the revolutions. Just think more broadly. Think about the like major overarching themes. Yeah, but whatever. It's not like it's not even like successful. They like fight it out and then they kill each other for a decade and then Napoleon comes to power and then they're just right back to a monarchy. So yeah, exactly. So really just stick to the bigger themes here for this exam. But here's a nice little picture for you, French Revolution, I don't know, enthusiasts. So this is actually an image of the second French Revolution. There are two, and in the 1830s, there are several revolutions that happen around Europe that lead to more like constitutionalism. there's in 1848, there's a bunch of them, but they're kind of failed. They're not really successful. But it's part of the reason why you have high migration rates coming out of Europe at that time. So kind of interesting. All right, let's jump into the very last key concept, 5.4. I have to say, I think if I had to choose one of my favorite key concepts, I don't know why, I just really like migrations. I find this fascinating. Just the like movement of people, these larger trends that happen, the things that happen as a result of that. I just find these like really interesting. So basically you have push and pull reasons for migrations. And if you can really just understand the differences between push and pull, you can apply that to any time in history. So people will always migrate for one of two reasons or for both reasons. Either the push is like, I have to leave this place. I have to leave because it's violent, or, I'm in danger, or I don't have enough opportunity. I'm not making enough money. I can't support my family. There's not enough food, whatever, right? There's, or I'm being forced to leave, right? Like I literally have to leave. So that would be a push, right? Then there's a pull. So even if you have to leave, you still have to decide where to go. So a pull would be what brings you to the place that you're going to. Is it opportunity? That's usually the big one, economic opportunity, political freedom, just general safety. Maybe there's already a community of people from your, home country. And so you go there because you already know people. So it's really, there's both of these forces matter. There's always going to be, one of the two or both. If there's a pull, doesn't that mean there's always a slight push as well? Like usually there's both, but not always. So like, I could pick up and move to Berlin tomorrow, and I could move there because Berlin is a thriving city and it's got, a great like tech industry and, large like young population, and it's a big city in Europe. And I might say, okay, there's a lot of opportunity for me there in Berlin, but I'm not being pushed out of the US. Like I don't have to go. And there's plenty of opportunity for me here, but I just want to be there. I'm more drawn by the opportunity there. So you could just be pulled and not pushed. You can be pushed and have to go someplace. So you just end up in the country next door, right? So like Syrian refugees, a lot of them going into like Lebanon are not necessarily pulled towards Lebanon. That's just kind of where that's the closest place to go. So you go. So understanding those two forces, though, explains all of this. So, some of the reasons why why there's just so many migrations in this time period is there's just more people. And, the fact that that there are so many more people, that the population rises, it changes, right? We have more food, we have better medicine, there's more people, that leads to changes in opportunity. Plus, you just have new transportation. It's just easier to go places. You can get there faster. And you could go work for a little bit and then return. That wasn't something that was totally possible before. It'd take too long to get to a place. So you wouldn't come back. You would just stay there. So there's a lot of movements. There's a lot of Japanese agricultural workers that go to work within the Pacific. Lebanese merchants will work in the Americas. Italian industrial workers will go to Argentina. Like these are just some examples, but there are tons. Another major group that is part of this, they're called the coolies. And that is specifically referring to Chinese and Indian laborers that move to, for example, the Chinese laborers that moved to the United States to build the transcontinental railroads. They're usually not paid a lot. Usually they a lot of them didn't necessarily stay. Some did, but that's just like a term that applies to like those two groups of people. And so tons and tons of movements of people. And then, of course, like we had mentioned, lots of reasons why people relocate. Some of them, keep in mind, it's push and pull, but there's also I'm choosing to go on my own free will, right? I want to go find a job, or I want to relocate. I want to move, or I'm being forced to go, right? So you still have slavery. You have even indentured servitude is not totally free will. You have semi-coerced labor to where that would be more like indentured servitude, where it's like you're basically being forced, but not like you are with slavery. And then convict labor, like Australia gets populated at first because of convicts. Britain literally just sends their prisoners to Australia. And that is the basis of Australia. Yeah, someone definitely needs to give Kanye a lesson. That one guy definitely did try, the like TMZ guy that responded to him. It's super fascinating. So Dylan, white Australia policy is similar to apartheid. It's basically like anti-immigration policy in Australia to keep Australia white. And that's that policy. So, with all these movements of people, there's huge effects of this. One would be social within the gender. So most migrants tend to be male, and that will then leave a larger population of women to fill the jobs that men leave in the like home countries. But it also adds a bigger like male population in the newer country. So there's like differences in gender. Also ethnic enclaves. So this is things like, and this is a little bit cut off, things like Chinatown is an ethnic enclave, Little Italy. You also just have like Chinese neighborhoods in Southeast Asia. You have Irish and Italian neighborhoods in North America. So, this is just natural, right? Like if you're going to move to another country, you want to be around people that speak the same language as you, people that might know your family, people that know what you're going through. And so that's how ethnic enclaves appear. And we have tons of ethnic enclaves now. Like New York City, it's like there's so many. And then also just political. So anytime you see a rise in immigration, you also will see a rise in anti-immigration policies. So, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 literally bans all immigrants from China in that time. So that's like the most egregious form, maybe in the United States history, of just like straight up banning a whole group. I mean, at least as of yet. And then the white Australia policy, right? So like keep Australia white would have banned other immigrants from other countries. All right, so let's look at some of your questions. Are ghettos and enclaves the same? No. So a ghetto would more refer to like a decaying city, or it kind of, then obviously it's applied to in like World War II. But a ghetto is more of, yeah, exactly. That was good. It's a ghettos trap people. That's kind of interesting. And people are trapped either politically or economically. And so whereas an enclave is not, you don't have to stay there. You can live in Chinatown if you want, and you don't have to live in Chinatown if you don't want to. Did syncretism happen between cultures here? Like Italian versions of Chinese culture? Yes, it does. So there are lots of little examples here. I would say the best examples would be with food and with language, of like blending of things. So even just like words that we use that come from other cultures that are sort of adopted through processes like these, and foods as well. Let's see. What is syncretism? So syncretism is a blending of usually like belief systems, but it can be with other things as well, where you're just combining ideas from two different things to create like a new thing. Why ban the Chinese? So basically, you have a rise in Chinese immigration, and then right around that time period in the US, you had the economy just like tanked. And so there are a lot of people who are unemployed. And when people are in economic distress, the first people they blame are the foreigners, right? Exactly. Like the Chinese are stealing the jobs, right? But obviously there's a lot of holes in that argument, but it actually starts in California. California passes the immigration law first, and then the entire country adopts it. So it becomes federal law. Syncretism developed in other periods too. Yeah, so syncretism is just like it's a force that happens throughout all of history. The Great Depression is in period 6. The whole current immigration issue, yeah, right? Like what we're dealing with today is not much different than what we dealt with then. And it's all related to economic trends. And for us right now, we're like, it would be tied to like what happened to our economy in like 2008. And we're still dealing with effects of that, where people are still dealing with that. And then you blame people. You want to blame someone else. You don't want it to just be some, it's hard. Like if you're not making enough money, if you lose your job or something, it's not, it's hard to just say, well, it's, the economy, it'll pick back up. It's a lot easier to like blame something that's more tangible. Wow. Josiah, we think alike. I didn't even read that you had said that. Yeah, exactly. So it's just a lot easier to do that. And so the Golden Gate Bridge was actually built during the Great Depression. So that in California, there were a lot of Chinese workers. And that was due to kind of just proximity. They're just on the West Coast. It's closer to China. Exactly. Yeah, psychological. There was a class at my college actually that was called psychohistory. And I wanted to take that more. I actually still think about that class sometimes, but I never got to take it. They like stopped it. I didn't get into the class. But that would have been like a fascinating class to like break down some of these psychological processes of like why people do what they do. I think it's fascinating. Okay, so just to give you a quick map of all the movement, so you can just see, you can visualize it. So obviously this is Freemanpedia. He just kind of kills it with these graphics. So, you can see if we start over in like the Americas, there's obviously a lot of movement into the United States. And you can attribute that to industrialization, leaving a lot of opportunity. And then, you can see like Americans moving west and also from the South. So like after slavery ends, after the Civil War, a lot of Black Americans will move from the South to the North. You have a lot of people moving into Argentina. You got a lot of people moving, you can see all the movement in India, in China. Yeah, I have no idea what graphics he uses. I don't think it's anything like super, I don't know, difficult. And then, Siberia is like Siberia becomes a place where like prisoners are taken. There's a lot of migrations into Siberia. That's sort of the Russian like expansion that happens. What caused the Irish migration? Basically what the Irish did is what you have to do is have biodiversity within your crops. And so if you don't have that and some sort of fungus spreads, it will affect all of your crops. Whereas if you have kind of diversity, then it won't affect all of them. And so Ireland didn't do that. They practiced monoculture. And so that's basically where all of their potatoes were the exact same species of potato, and a fungus spread and killed them all. And so that led to I think like 1 million people either died or left Ireland. So a huge shift in population. And the British just ignored them. So the question of why do people hate the Irish so much? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know of people hating on Irish. I mean, there's obviously like the British versus Irish rivalry that is a colonial rivalry. And then, yeah, like the Irish would have been attacked early on for like just the increase in migration would have led to hating on the Irish, just like we talked about with all the other ones. Yeah. Your teacher kept saying that everyone hates the Irish. I don't know. I mean, the Irish are Catholic, and that could be one reason. So like in America tends to be more Protestant, and there's always a division, like a rivalry between Protestants and Catholics. And so that tends to be the case. Yeah, period 7. So I don't know where they would divide it. I think we're in it. I think we're just in period 7. And so I think period 6 will probably stop at 2001 or 2000. I think that's probably where period 6 will end up stopping. Or like 1989, 1990. And then we're in it. I think there is no period 7 where this is like the life we're living in right now. I think it will end up being all of this. I mean, imagine the DBQ in 20 years on the A-push test. Like it's going to have Trump's tweets on it. Like, you know, there's going to be a DBQ with that, you know, like you're literally like, of course it is, you know, like think about all this stuff that's happening that right now, there's going to be an A push DBQ about this time period. And like, that's going to be super hard. That's going to be like weird, you know, like you think about all the things that you guys are looking at, all these documents, and they feel so long ago. And then like when you just think about what students are going to have to do in 20 years, 30 years, like however long, it's going to be Twitter, it's going to be tweets, it's going to be Instagram posts. Like that's just what it is, right? And they're going to look at it and be like, God, what is Twitter? What a stupid thing. Like, who would have used that? I don't know. Like, right. Like you could think about, you could practice your analysis with tweets, you know, go on Twitter and practice your context, practice your audience, your POV, right? Just look at what Trump's tweeting and think about his point of view, his purpose, his audience. Yeah, of course they're going to have to remember more. I mean, relatively, though, it's not like it's that bad because, you know, you already have 10,000 years. What's another 20, right? What's another 50? And, you know, who knows how long College Board exists? I don't know. Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, they're going to look back on all this and be like, what a weird time. Why did people do that? All right. So any questions about period 5? I know we've covered a lot of ground. Period 5 definitely has a lot in it. I would definitely recommend, you know, really practicing period 5. Just because like this is the stuff that like you're totally going to see at least some question about period 5 content, whether it's in the LEQ, the DBQ, or a short answer question. Like you're going to get something on one of these things. Yeah, the things I covered today is I use specifically the key concepts. So that's just what College Board says. This is what will be on the test in terms of this time period. And then what you guys can do is just go back through and learn more of the like key terms for each of these things. And yep, period 6 I'll do next Friday, and then we'll spend the next every day until the test doing practice essays, doing like different timelines, doing all kinds of stuff. Someone asked, what is the Pacific Rim? So the Pacific Rim is just any lands that touch the Pacific Ocean. So it's just like, you know, that whole like East Asia, Australia, and then the Americas would be the Pacific Rim. All right. Any other Little Rocket Man? Yeah, who knows, you guys? I think I can't wait to see the DBQ about Twitter. Yes, you can email me anytime you have questions. So while you're studying in the next week, if anything comes up that you're like, I don't understand this, or if you write a practice essay and you want me to grade it, send it over to me and I will look at it. So anytime you need anything, just email me and I'll help you out. I'm not teaching in a classroom right now. So this is what I'm doing. I'm focused on helping you guys. You guys are my students. So if you have any questions, just hit me up. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. No, you're not bothering me. This is my job, right? This is what I'm doing. So I don't know. I mean, if you email me like every minute, maybe, but I will respond to you. I will get back to you, and I'll try to do it as quickly as I can. So yeah, so definitely just, you know, hit me up if you have questions. And tomorrow we're going to look at some practice LEQs, okay? And go over that. And so if you guys, so just so that you know, for those of you that are new to Fiveable, so a lot of you guys came in last night, you should have gotten an email today with your link, your ambassador link. And so just so that you know how that works, just while I have you guys here, that's funny. While you have the link for the ambassador stuff, if you share that link with your classmates and they buy a membership to Fiveable, 15% of their like admission fee goes right back to you. So I'm basically like paying you to promote the program, right? So you'll get that money and you can use it for whatever you want. And there's no limit on what you do. So, look back in your email as a email from me that has a specific link to you. And so if you, so if you want to know more about how that works, you want help with it, just let me know, because you can put that link online. You could tweet it, you can put it in your bio on Instagram, you could put a Snapchat story about it, whatever. You can market as much as you want. And I have AP World and APUSH, so you can market it to anyone who's taking either of those classes, and they can come in and you will get some of that money back. So just to keep that in mind. You got your entire class to join. What is your entire class? What did they didn't all join Fiveable, did they? Does College Board have practice prompts from last year's exam? Yes, they do. So if you just Google AP World exam and click the first link, it's there. Oh, dope. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, so it's the same thing with the cram session. If your friends just want to sign up for the cram session, it's $5 for the 2-hour thing that I'm going to do 2 nights before the test. And so for that too, you would get money from that back. So obviously it's only $5, so it's less money, but teacher told you that it's likely that College Board would not give us SAQs in the same periods. So, okay, so if you want to you can strategize it, you can look back at all the questions they've given, and it's, they create new ones. So it's not going to be the same, right? They've already asked a question that compares causes of revolutions. So you're not going to get the exact same question, but the topics are not totally crossed out. But you can make all kinds of predictions. It's hard to tell. I don't know. I feel like I said this before. I have this feeling about period 3, and I also have a feeling about decolonization. I've been kind of waiting on decolonization. Let's see. Where do I get the ambassador link? Sabrina, it should have been emailed to you. Check your email. If you don't have it, let me know and I'll send it to you. You can also just get it in Fiveable. When you log in, there's an option to click affiliate, and it's there. It should be there. And then the diagnostic test. I'm actually going to send this out to everyone. So I made a diagnostic test. It's 25 multiple choice questions that I literally just took from an old AP exam, and I tagged all the questions by theme, so social, political, whatever, by skill, so CCOT comparison, and then also by time period. And so when you take it, I can tell I made a crazy Excel sheet, and so it basically tells you which of those categories you did the worst in. So I can tell you which time period, which theme, and which skill are your lowest. So I'm going to send that out to everyone tonight. So I'll just send that out to everyone. And then you can take that 25 questions. You'll get, you'll know how many you got correct. And then I'll send you an email with what your lowest stuff was. So, do I still have multiple choice questions that I used? I have some stuff. If you email me, Vera, I'll email you out some stuff. Thank you guys for, honestly, you guys are the best because you're out here studying on a Friday night, I wish I could go back to high school me and shake me and be like, do this stuff. It will help you later. You'll need it in college. Even if you don't pass the test, you're better off having done this. Yeah, exactly. I mean, me too, right? So, yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Your social life will come in college, right? When you're not worried about some of these these basic classes all your freshman friends will be in. Forget them, right? So, all right, you guys. So I'm going to be out for tonight, and I will post this up inside of Fiveable. I've also posted the actual slides that I've been using too, so I figured I'd give you a chance to see that. So just as I usually do, if today was helpful for you, just hit a 1 in the chat so I can just see that today was useful for you. Thank you guys so much, and definitely, let me know. We're getting into the real deal here. So if you have any questions, just email me. I want to make sure that I want you to feel super confident on test day. So I want you to wake up on May 17th and be like, I got this. Let's do it. I don't want you to be all stressed out. So whatever I have to do to help you get there, I'm prepared for it. So let's do this. All right. All right. I'm out. Feel 50% more confident than before I signed up. Yeah. No, don't. We should all add each other on Snap. Yeah, you should. You totally should. This has been a big confidence boost. Yeah, that's awesome. I don't want to like close this if you guys are about to share things. Viable story time. Yeah, I feel like someone's about to say something. What's going on? Oh. Albert.io is for multiple choice questions. Yeah, they also have essay questions in there as well. All right. Well, if you guys want to post your Snapchats here, I'll leave this open for a second and you can share each other's stuff. So go ahead. Is Albert.io helpful? Or you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send out, just so that you guys don't have to do this, I'm going to make a document right now with, you know, an open source one, name, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever. And I'm just going to send it out to everyone. And whoever wants to add their stuff on there can, and you can add each other through that. Okay? So I'm going to email you guys right now with a document. So you don't have to like post in here. All right. Dope. All right. All right, you guys, I'm out. So have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow at 6. Woohoo! Bye.